Hope the lockdown's going well. Yeah. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah. Ko te tangi tēnei a tamali, ka wara e tukuna kia kurangi a koe e te iwi tamli. Ngā whakaro, ngā waiaro, o honga ake ka ki te tenei no mai anō. E rangi mo te oranga nui me no ho pai anō. Ke tūpato chief ke huri koe hei kai ako. Te nākahi, e hare ana i te pātiti, e whai ana ki ano hoko te tika, te toko iti. Me ua ka whiti pene anō i te priti, tori whakapaparanga kātahi pēr te rā ka whiti. Nā whai anō tā tātou ini kitua o tipsy, tūronga waiwai kore ko tōna rite he gypsy. Anā, ko tātou te rai ai nei, no pira pēna hoa nā, we can't fly away. Tohunga suppression, that means we must hide away. Make sure the pillars were soft so we could die away. Ha! Ko te atua tōku piringa. As long as we believe on this one, no ko whiringa. Ki te kore, well, you know, I'm in it. So we all take off our hats and go, I'm in it, I'm in it, I'm in it. Yeah. I'm in it, I'm in it, I'm in it. Yeah. How does it feel to be house standing on your own land? That's why my man, I sing my song. Toru whāri ma banga whakapaparanga. Disconnected, that's the Maketū we under oppression. I ain't trying to bring us down, it's just something I don't hear much in this generation. E pene me te hip-hop, mo tēne reanga. Must be scared, Anna, hence why I'm here to raise the bar. I'm a modern day Māori, more real than most. But whakaiti be fucking with my need to boast. This mana mo tu haki te be getting old, cause they mining our data and selling to our soul. Me pehera, te kiteanga mahi tōtika. Especially when our screen time's up in them figures. Kana te Māori, hope they whakaoho mai. But if they don't, at least I know that you will paki mai. Mai ia ngā tani whao te ao ho. Mai ia, cause intrinsically we know it's time to go. Mai ia, cause we need you at your best. This is only me putting my yeah to the test.
Ka tauha whakatau ko te rangi etu nei, ka tauha whakatau ko te papai takoto nei, ka tauha whakatau ko te taumata kōrero ngā mātua kua mene ki te pōkati hei. Mauri ora e ngaiwi o te motu nei mai. Welcome back. Welcome once, welcome twice, welcome three times to the Taumata Kōrero, the quintessential space to disseminate a little bit of esoteric, which is exactly what we're up to tonight, ladies and gentlemen. No mai ha, mai hoki mai rā to all of our viewers coming in live from around the country, the four corners of the country. In the waiting room, ladies and gentlemen, we have live two of the most prolific Māori chefs in the industry at the moment, and they are waiting to give you a bit of an insight into tēnei mea te kai, ka mutu ko te kai a te rangatira. You'll catch on soon what I'm on when we get there. No reira, without further ado, let's bring in my sisters, Karena and Kasey Bird. No mai, haere maira, welcome to the Taumata Kōrero. Tēnā kōrua.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koe ranira.
Hey, let's kick the wānanga off. Let's get it started. Nā te mea e kei te kite au, kei te whakaeke mai ngā kai mā taki ki te whakarongo i wa tātou kōrero i tēnei po. Let's just throw it over to you guys. Tell us a bit about yourselves, who you are, where you're from, where you're currently residing, how lockdown has been for you two over the last, 4 or 5 days?
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou e noho haumaru ana i o koutou nā whare, anei te mihi mai Maketū kia koutou katoa. I'm Karena, this is Kasey. We live in Maketū, in a little cul-de-sac. We're very fortunate in our bubble. Kasey and her husband live in their whare, and then our sister Michaela lives next door to them. I live down the road, and my mum and dad have their own whare. So we eat every single night at my parents' house. And then we go home and shut the door when we get hohai at each other. So very fortunate in this lockdown.
So I think it's quite similar to how we are like before lockdown. We spend every night having kai together. That's just something we've always done as a whānau. And I think also just growing up in Maketū, we are really close. Like it's a small community. I think actually it's getting pretty big now. I think there's about 1,000 people that live here. So yeah. Bursting at the seams over here in
Getting
Maketū.
up there, whānau, getting up there. 1,000 people in Maketū.
Right.
But yeah, we're
Talk to me. Oh, kei a koe.
Okay, okay.
Talk to me, tēnei mea te kai. Food, glorious food. He aha ki a kōrua, what is it?
I think for me, kai is something that connects everybody. Everybody eats in some way, shape or form from Maketū to all around the world. So I think for me, food is something we have to do as humans, but it's also something that you can do that brings joy. It connects people. I think also within food, there's stories, there's culture. So there's so many facets to food. And I think for me, that's what makes food exciting. No matter how much you learn, there's always something else you're not going to know.
I hara te mea ko te kai tētahi mea tino nui ki ngai Māori katoa. So I think growing up, food has always been like the center point of our whānau gatherings, down at the marae, we're in the kitchen. Actually at the marae, we're still at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to the kitchen, like
True.
buttering toast,
Yeah.
peeling onions, that type of thing. So as I think Māori in general are just so good at manaakitanga, which for the most part, a lot of the time means kai. We're fortunate our mother's been is a great cook. We grew up with our whānau from Ohinematu, our Mitchell side. They they're well known in the area for hosting manuhiri, and so I think that's just like been passed down through the generations. I love eating. I think for food, it's one of the only things you can do that uses all of your senses. So I think that's why it stirs up so many like memories and so many connections. When you see food or smell food, it can bring back those really those like deep memories you have.
Sensory experience, full sensory experience. You touched on a few touch points there, and I want to bring it back. Kaore te nuinga e tino mōhio ana he mokopuna kōrua nā tērā o tātou tino rangatira o te ao Māori nā Tai Mitchell. You fellas got a bit of a talk us through the whakapapa. There's some interesting whakapapa links going on around the country.
Yeah, so Tai Mitchell, on our dad's side, his dad's mother was Tai Mitchell's daughter, so that Tai Mitchell's our great grandfather, so our korauā. So we have that connection there. Unfortunately, though, we weren't very good at rugby growing up, but
it wasn't as popular for women back then, Kasey. We're just in the wrong generation. And then in the bio for this podcast, or for this episode, I noticed that we had left our Ngāti Manawa side off, so it's all our whānau in Murupara, or the bird whānau. Ka mihi atu kia koutou katoa.
I'll actually jump in there and save Karena, because she's taking the blame for it, but that was actually my bad. No reira, koutou e noho mai nā ki runga Murupara, aroha mai no koutou katoa te ēnei kōtiro nei. E mihi ana rā ki e rā kōrero, and you've also got links up north. Talk to us how that kind of, is it through your beautiful mother, I'm guessing, your connection to the north?
So from our mum, on our mum's side, she's from Waima. She grew up in Waima, so we spent lots of time up in Waima growing up. I remember that was the first place I went eeling, and it's funny for us coming from Maketū, which is a small place. We were like the city slickers when we'd go up to Waima, which was quite funny because we came from a really small town. But in Waima, we were like, from the big city. So, we've got connections to Te Maihurihuri up there. And I think,
well, our mum's mum was a Wilcox, so we're related to Julian and all the Wirikake whānau from up north.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah.
That guy. The Julian Wilcox character, Te Maihurihuri. Trust them about as far as you can throw them. Hey, and awesome news. Actually, the bird whānau in Maketū are expecting a baby.
Yeah.
Exciting news.
The first baby bird is coming along.
Everyone's losing their minds in our whānau. Our parents had pretty much given up hope because we were all sort of like in our 30s, no signs of having babies. And so they were like, you all are a waste of time.
Yeah, our parents were like that. They were getting to the point where they actually sat us down. So I'm 7 months hapu at the moment, and a week before I found out we had this like whānau hui, we're like, I wonder what this hui is about. And it was about babies and carrying on the whakapapa, and our parents were talking about, what's going to happen if it's just you guys and all this. And so it was quite funny.
That's your Māori worldview, like if it ends with you, your whakapapa and all of the generations that have come before you have worked hard for nothing.
Yeah, so no pressure, but it was funny. So that whole time I was already pregnant. So when I actually got to tell my whānau, they were all so excited. Yeah, which has been awesome. It's really exciting for us as a whānau.
Yeah.
And I know Karena's got big plans for the baby. Once the baby's born, once the baby joins us in 2 months' time, Karena's got big plans for the nutritional requirements and the dietary requirements of the baby.
I think it's beyond the nutritional requirements. It's like experiential baby dining is what I've heard she's got planned.
No, well, because the baby is actually due on my birthday. And so, like, obviously, I want our baby to experience all of the culinary wonders that there are in the world. So I've already planned, like, puree degustations when it's on solids. I'm going to have birthday traditions where I take the baby to a degustation dinner. Kasey will call up and be like, "Where's my baby?" And I'll be like,
We're in Melbourne.
Well, depending
Maybe
on how they're
But
doing
I
with their
think
COVID.
actually something interesting in terms of like having a baby, what we've been looking at is what different people around the world feed their babies, which is quite interesting. So we found like looking in China, they'll give their babies like dried fish and things like that. So all the different
Seaweed,
countries, and when
congee.
they introduce spices and different flavors, which I think is a little bit different to obviously what we do here in Aotearoa. So I think for us it's been quite interesting to look at maybe some of those things as well, introducing those flavors for our baby. Yeah.
I want to bring us back into your guys' journey into the kitchen and leading us on these sensory explosions that you seem to be delivering every evening that you serve dinner to our tables. Where did it all begin? How did you get into this whole cooking chef kind of buzz? How did that happen?
Kasey loved cooking. As a kid, she wanted to be a chef, and like so for Christmases and birthdays, she would get cookbooks for her birthdays and Christmas. And
I think growing up in Maketū, we just had an abundance of kai. So when we were little, like, you know, we could go down to the beach and collect pipi and start our own fires, but people these days don't really like kids starting fires. But, you know, those were the types of things we were able to do growing up. And we'd always have big whānau dinner every weekend where all of our aunties and uncles would come and bring all this different kai. So we'd try, our first things we would try were all the things we hadn't seen before. So we just had this kind of natural affinity towards trying different kai and flavors. But I think in terms of cooking, like, it didn't really get serious until we were a little bit older. And I think we just grew up, our parents were quite traditional in terms of their whakaaro around what you do for a living. So our dad was an accountant, our mum worked at Waikato University, and so their kind of thing was that, you know, you go to university, you get a corporate job, and then that's what you do. And so in terms of like food being a career option, we never even considered that something we could actually do for our, you know, for our lives. And so it was always just a hobby on the side. And so I think for us, like growing up, we'd live in Maketū, we'd save up our pocket money so we could go and spend it at restaurants in Auckland. So we were 16, 17, driving from Maketū to Auckland to eat out, which everyone thought was really odd. But for us, it was just our favorite thing to do. So instead of like going to concerts or buying CDs or clothes, we'd be saving up to go and eat out, which was just something we loved doing. And I think that kind of started our sort of journey.
When you look back on it now, it seems quite obvious that food should have been the career path, but back then it was just different. And I think like, and then when Kasey moved to Melbourne and I moved to Wellington, and whenever we spoke on the phone, it would only be food based. Like, where have you eaten? What have you been eating? And then I was obsessed with watching cooking shows. Like when I was growing up, it was like the era of the Food Network, and watching like Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay and Nigella, and I was just like, I was obsessed with it.
Yeah, and I remember Karena, she was studying in Wellington, like commerce or something, and she was working 2 jobs so she could save up enough money so she could literally eat out every single night, and then that's what I think I may have cooked like 5 meals in my, like, while I was flatting in about 5 years, because I just ate out every single night. Yeah, I remember I had to like save up to visit her because we'd always be going like all these restaurants and things, and I was a student at the time as well. So yeah, it was like, I don't know how much more of a slap in your face of what your destiny should be, like, more, like what more you need to say, like, you should do something in food, guys.
Yeah. Talk to me. What's it like? When I see two quite well-to-do chefs like you two, I always wonder. The question crosses my mind: what is it like when you go to the marae? when you go into the wharekai and your kuia and your aunties and your mum's probably in there doing the do, making it happen, what's that like?
When it's our whānau that we know, it's like they don't give like two hoots about us really. They're like, oh cool, the girls are here, have a kai. But then say if we go to other wānanga outside of our immediate whānau, we get this thing where they're like, oh, what are you doing here? You can't eat any of the kai. We didn't know you were coming here. But for us, it's like if there's people like whānau, especially at the marae, making kai, it's like we're grateful to be having a kai, and especially if we don't have to cook it. But yeah, it's funny the different places you go and people don't want to feed you.
Well, but then there are other times when they're really excited to show you their kai. So they're like, did you try the
seafood chowder?
Yeah. Like, did you try this? So yeah, there's like a whole range of responses we get when we go to like marae and things to eat.
You'll go up, they're like, don't eat this one, and they'll like push you along to the next thing if you like go and they're like, serving out the kai or stuff like that.
No, but let's be honest though. Let's be honest and back me up here. I think I've had some dishes at some marae around the country that top some dishes that you can find on the likes of Ponsonby Road in Auckland.
Oh, definitely. You're never going to find like an awesome, delicious like mutton bird boil up somewhere on Ponsonby Road, right? It's like there's lots of different kai that at home is just way better.
Oh, 100%. And I think sometimes when you go to because we love eating out, that's like my hobby. Sometimes you go to places and they're fancy for fancy's sake, but they don't necessarily taste that great. Where you go, I think with Māori and like even in Maketū, like in Rotorua, Ngāti Manawa, when we go back up north, it's like the quality of food that you get out of those places is honestly incredible, and it is so delicious. And I think just like cooking is a pukenga that so many Māori naturally have.
And it's funny for us, like we've worked in different kitchens in New Zealand all around the world, but if people see like chefs, professional chefs, saw what happened at Tangi, how you don't know how big the ope is going to be, you don't know what time people are going to show up, but the fact that every time there's a kai on the table, it's like if you go to kitchens and that happened, they would freak out. But with Māori, it's just a part of who we are, which is actually really cool because we'll go to different things and like chefs will be freaking out and we're thinking,
you're like, oh, I don't have a Paco jet, or like I don't have a sous vide machine.
So it's quite funny because we're thinking, like for us, so many things just seem quite simple because you're used to that type of just cooking with whatever you have, with whatever equipment you have,
whatever ingredients arrive at the marae on the day. You don't know how many hands you're going to have in the kitchen to help you. I think it's like it's a real lesson in just problem solving and like spontaneous cookery.
Yeah. Let's run with that. Let's kind of run with that. You mentioned that you've cooked in kitchens around the world. Before we get into, I want to start talking MasterChef soon because what I saw on that 2014 edition of MasterChef, I've seen at the marae. And you were talking about being one-trick ponies, and we can get into that anyway. But let's talk. Where has this whole cooking thing taken you guys? Like you're talking about some of the big kitchens around the world.
So I've actually got a list of places we've been able to go to, like from our cooking. I'll find it and I'll read it.
We would have had this prepared if it was in our briefing, but
Who's running this Mickey Mouse circus? Eh?
Yeah, so since winning MasterChef, we've been to France, Sweden, Australia, Bali, Hong Kong, France, Italy, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Germany, Denmark, Chile, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, China, Italy, New Caledonia, and Singapore as well. Recent, yeah.
Far out.
Just a couple of places cooking.
Oh, just a few.
Yeah. So it's been amazing. We've been able to travel all over the world, learning about kai, learning about people, learning about culture, and it's every place we go to. The kai means the same thing for people. It means connection. It means whānau. It's history. You can tell, the history of a place from a plate of kai. Who's been there? Has that place been colonized? And you can see all of those changes within the kai, what the landscape is like as well.
True. I want to let's segue that into MasterChef, because when you talk about connecting and putting not just food on a plate but putting a culture on a plate, I was doing a bit of research, as I do because I'm quite a academic here. One of the dishes that came out was correct me if I'm wrong because I'm trying to tell you about your own dishes, a deconstructed boil up, or was it a hangi?
We did both.
That's what I wanted you to say. But talk to me about that. Was that did you actually like consciously go in there saying we're going to take Te Ao Māori and put it in front of these Pākehās? Te nui ngā kaore tino kite I te pārekareka o ngā kai Māori pēnei. Is that something you sort of do?
I tā māua whakaritinga mō te hōtakara, like when we were preparing, we knew that we had made it onto the show like a month before we actually went onto the show.
Yeah.
And I can hear myself talking back to myself. Anyways, and we had like this really intense study plan. So we had like flashcards around like name 5 Italian flavors that you can think of. Like what are 5 French flavors, 5 Indian flavors. We had spreadsheets with like pork, and then each of the different cuts of pork, 2 or 3 different dishes that we could make with pork. We had like those fish charts, so we could do fish identification. We were practicing like cake and custard and mousse and all those recipes so that we could change the flavors if we needed to. And we also practiced like say what we would say were our signature dishes. So we had actually like conceptualized the boil up dish before we went to MasterChef. And we had conceptualized a hangi dish as well, just hoping that one of the challenges would present itself where we actually could cook those things. So we were quite conscious of making sure that we included like our identity and who we are on the plate.
Yeah, I think we actually had discussions before it. Like, so if we had the judges try our kai, how would we want them to know it's our kai, or what would make them know that actually Karena and Kasey cooked this? And so we actually had discussions about that. And then right from the beginning, we had an understanding of what made us unique and what made us special and different. And we knew it was who we are and where we came from. And our, you know, being Māori was the thing that set us apart from everybody else. And we just had this sort of, we just knew that within ourselves, which I think for a lot of people is like they're trying to find their cooking identity or who they are, but that was already a part of what we knew going in. So I think we're really fortunate in that regard, and I think that's kind of carried us through our whole cooking career. Is that whakaaro?
Yeah. How do you how have you gone about building on that? Because when we were talking earlier, when we were getting when I was continuing my research, my extended research into my subject matter, you were talking about taking that idea of identity on a plate and taking it into places that it wouldn't otherwise be seen, which is something that I think a lot of us don't realize the importance of the actual mahi that you two do, is taking you know, these, excuse the academia speak, but like taking like these epistemologies and all of these worldviews and putting them on a plate and going, here is Te Ao Māori, e kai kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think for us, it's been a journey to that kind of place. And I think one thing that definitely started that was when we were traveling, we were hearing all these beautiful stories about other people's culture and, you know, how they were showing that on the plate. And then we knew that we could be doing this in a really beautiful, amazing way. We have beautiful stories of our history and who we are. So how can we represent that with kai? And so for us, we're like, we should look into storytelling through kai. And then we kind of started working with that idea.
Storytelling through food isn't something that we have created, or, you know, like it's not something new. I feel like Māori have been doing that for eons. I just think that the fusion of sort of like, you know, like techniques or culinary techniques that we may know from our fine dining experiences and our international travel, but then using the flavors and ingredients that we have grown up with, you know, in Maketū with our whānau. So the thing I really like is sharing our kōrero and our pūrākau with guests. So say if you're not Māori and you're experiencing that, it's like actually widening the box of what is considered Māori cuisine. And then that's the same for the Māori who come into our dinners as well. You know, it might have fancy names and it might look different than what you're used to seeing when you think of Māori kai. But our hope is that when you taste it and when you eat it, the wairua and those like flashbacks of your childhood come flooding back when you're eating the kai. So it's like a two-way bridge of inviting people into our world, but also showcasing to our own the heights of what we can do with our Māori kai.
This is messy because then we start getting into territory like when you start like opening up the Maori world to people who wouldn't otherwise be privy to it. We start getting into like decolonization territory and like re-indigenization and like all that sort of stuff. Am I on the right track, or Casey's like, what are you talking about?
No, I think there's definitely elements to us, and then so for us there's the kai part of it, which is actually the food, and then something we like to do is actually tell stories, our Māori stories, and then match that with kai. So one of the dinners we've done is we match our kai to the story of Rangi and Papa and them separating. So the first dish we had with this degustation dinner was actually, everything was black because it was te kore te pō, but we actually had an oyster, and it had charcoal and all these things with it. But, within an oyster, it's like from the outside, it doesn't look like much. It could just look like a rock. But then within that, there's life and being. And so connecting the whakaaro of that, kai to that story. And so for us, it was like making those connections between different dishes and food. So, the next part is Rangi and Papa together. So we had a mushroom foam, which represented the air. Then we had everything that was from the earth underneath, which represented Papa Tuanaku. Then as we went through, like, just developing that story through different dishes is something that we really love to do.
I feel like also like real food lovers who like to try different kai from other cultures, who, like want to try different things, like they're really open to experiencing and learning about other cultures. I think food is such a great gateway for people to see the real depth and beauty of Te Ao Māori. Yeah. And honestly, like it is, if you're Māori these days, it is the most exciting and dynamic time. Like during this last matariki, when matariki was rising, we had like a different matariki dinner every single weekend, and those tickets were just going, like they were gone in a matter of like days. Like we couldn't even put them on our social media because they just sold out so fast. Like people are hungry to learn about our culture, and it's like just such a beautiful space.
I think also, even if like just as Māori being able to go out to spaces and celebrate who you are, it's like there weren't as many spaces available to do that, especially through kai. Like, where can you go to do that? And now there's these things now where you can do that, and it's exciting.
I feel like there's kawa on like heaps of things now when you go out to those fancy restaurants.
That's what I'm saying. Like now, that's what it's like. It's like you can go out and experience it, where before there wasn't those opportunities to, or there were places you could actually experience.
Is that a relatively new thing, like the amalgamation of like Māori ingredients into like some of these like really up there Pākehā restaurants? Is that a new thing?
100%. Yeah,
it's definitely something that I think. And then because I think there's been lots of movements around the world in different places using ingredients from their country and things like that. And so I think with New Zealand, that's this kind of...
It's shifting. So I think...
interesting space. People are trying to find like the identity of New Zealand kai. But at the end of the day, people have to come back to
Indigenous
cuisine, because that's what New Zealand is. That's what makes us unique. And so it's this balance between people wanting to...
I think there's an interesting kōrero coming up around like intellectual property and like mātauranga around ingredients and kai that hasn't been had yet, because like it's very normal for chefs to go overseas and go to different countries and then come back and open like
an Italian,
a Japanese, Italian, Vietnamese restaurant. But with Māori culture, because we're here, like it's sort of like uncharted territory around like what is okay to use, like what is an ingredient, what is rongoa. Like
that's why I ask,
like salt, or is it different? So there's like all of these uncharted territories that are really interesting in the world of food at the moment.
That's why I ask, like, when and are we getting into calling our mates out for like cultural appropriation yet, or I don't know, are we gonna have that conversation? But like, when you mention kawa, and then I'm like, my Māori brain is going, okay, well, what are the tikanga that are appropriate when these Pākehā restaurants are going into the bush to collect kawa? Do they know that you pick it at a certain time, e rā mea katoa, to get all the nutrients, all of these sorts of things? So how do we go about and
then also the sustainability around harvesting and things, and what does that look like, and how do we sustain all these natural ingredients if everybody wants to use them for obviously having restaurants? It's a commercial purpose, right? So it's it's a new conversation that I think needs to be.
And then just
put on the table.
with our kainau ingredients, it's not just like, you know, you go out and you get pepper and you put it on your food, or, you know, like it's just some spice you put on. It's like we wear it on, you know, on our heads when we're at tangihanga. You know, it's a sign of mourning. It's a sign of death. You know, we use it on mamai, and like, you know, it's this mātauranga that's been handed down. But I think there's a lot of spaces in Te Ao Māori that we're getting into that we haven't been in yet. So there's a lot of wānanga going on around what we're okay with and what we're not okay with as Māori.
Yeah. Speaking of wānanga, I want to keep moving the discussion. What are we at? We're at 30 minutes exactly. I want to keep moving the conversation around wānanga. The first place I kind of crossed you guys was at a wānanga reo, Te Taumata. And actually the first one, shout outs to Te Taumata wānanga reo, the best of wānanga reo in North, 0800 nanama. The moment was quite funny because I was in the kitchen with the ladies, and they were going to me, boy, is that Kasey and Karena of TV, boy? Is that them, those chefs? Are they outside, boy? Is that them out there? And I was like, yeah, auntie, that's them. And they're like, oh, do you reckon our kai's going to be good for them? We got our hakari. Have a look at this menu, boy. Do you reckon this menu's all good? And I'm like, yeah, they'll be all right. Anyway, because of the fact it was a wānanga reo, talk to me. Is there a bit of a wānanga reo, is there a bit of a reo Māori journey happening at the moment? Let's get into that. Te kaia te rangatira.
Te kaia te rangatira.
Maua tino kai and I know.
Well, ia maua e pakeke ana ki Maketū ko tō maua mama he kaia kōrero Māori. So she taught Te Reo Paitahi in Tauranga for 11 years while we were growing up. Unfortunately for us, we were stupid back then. Like it was just like a different era. And so we went to like a bilingual primary school. And we were really fortunate with our kaiako there, with our Whae Maria and Mrs. Tapsell. And so we were bilingual, but then once we got to intermediate and high school, like we didn't go into the real classes once we got there.
Yeah, so we definitely lost what we had over time. And then I think for us, as we've kind of gone through our lives, and not having the reo has always been something that I've been really self-conscious about.
It was embarrassing. Like mum had hundreds of students. Yeah,
our mum was a teacher of people who would start beginner or not have nothing and walk out of her classes fluent at the end of, you know, their time with her. And then so we'd have these people coming up to us in the street and talking to us in Te Reo Māori, and all we could say was ai, Kyle, kia ora, you know, and it was actually something that I always felt self-conscious about. And then
the inadequacy of being a Māori.
Yeah, you know, and then going through MasterChef and being identified as Māori, so like afterwards and winning and like, oh, Māori, you must be so proud, but then always having that other sense of inadequacy, like if we're Māori and we have this platform, we're not being the best Māori we can be if we're not. I think that was one part that was missing from us.
Yeah.
And so after we went, you know, traveling overseas for a few years, we're learning about everybody else. We're just like, man, we've learned so much about everybody else, but we still need to do our own mahi at home in terms of our own reo and our own sort of mātauranga with Māori. And so we just made the decision.
I remember one summer I just told Kasey, I was like, I'm going to learn Te Reo Māori next year full time, and that's it. Like,
yeah, she was like, cancel everything in our calendar, no mahi, like we're not going to go overseas, we're not going to do nothing, we're going to learn Te Reo Māori. And so then that's what we did.
My dad's like very, so like even during the MasterChef process, like my mum was very supportive of us going on MasterChef and was buying us pressure cookers, you know, like making sure that we had all this equipment to practice with. But our dad was the opposite. He said, you're not going on that show, you're going to embarrass our entire whānau, do you even know how to cook? You know, that type of thing.
Yes.
And so he's always been like our biggest, he keeps it real. And then, so I remember when we had decided to learn, like I was deciding whether or not to learn Te Reo Māori.
We were trying to figure out what we were going to do for that following year, I think.
And what he said, write down your top 10 things that are your priorities in your life. And he said, now cross 5 of them off. Now cross 2 of them off, so you have your top 3. And what's the top thing on your list? And it was Te Reo Māori. And he's like, so every other thing comes secondary to that, because if you can't find time for the most important thing in your life, you're never going to get there. And we were obviously like in a very privileged position that we were able to work in the holidays and still work in the weekends and take time off for an entire year to like do 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. Te Reo Māori 5 days a week. You know, not many people are able to do that. And so we just spent that year like heads down, bums up, like going to wānanga and Maketū, going to more tier classes at Rotorua and Maketū, going to Kurereo. And it's honestly the best decision we've ever made, apart from your baby probably. Like that was the biggest decision we've made in our lives, I think.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the best things we've done. It's just brought so much more. I don't know. I just feel, I think for me, even especially like, I don't know, being on TV and doing all that stuff, I had a lot of anxiety about just that. Like I just would worry about things. But after learning Te Reo Māori, I'm so much more I just have this whole sense of like calm and understanding of what the next step is. Like everything's so much clearer. Whereas before I'd worry about just the smallest things, but now it's like, yeah,
you've got way bigger things to worry about, Nervy.
I know.
Excuse the pun. You've got bigger fish to fry. Hey, I want to bring it back because you two have touched on something massive, and it's this inadequacy that you've felt because of the fact that you have a perceived lack of a grasp on Te Reo Māori. Why do we do that to one another? Why do we like put these anxieties on one another to say, oh, you're less of a Māori than me, bro, because kara koe te mohi te kōrero Māori, but I can say...
I don't actually think that other people made me feel like that. I think that was my own feeling from within myself. So say like if I meet somebody else and they, you know, like they don't know Te Reo Māori, and they, you know, they don't have time, or like their circumstances don't let them, you know, they're not able to learn Te Reo Māori, like you never judge them, but it's like their own thing from within yourself. Like I personally never felt judged by others. It was just that hunger and that like desire to fill that piece of the puzzle that I personally was missing.
Yeah. And it's
so yeah, I don't like that whole like you're not a real Māori if you're not a real Māori if that this that.
But then it's also as a person, like to not feel those things is a whole different thing. Like you just feel that within you, and then but being able to make the time to change that feeling within yourself is so fulfilling and awesome. And then even I think in terms of our mahi, we're already exploring like Te Ao Māori through kai and identity and things like that. It's only kind of deepen and strengthen that relationship, and especially with our storytelling, like it's just has so much more sort of depth to it. We've been able to get more insight as we've learnt Te Reo Māori, which has been really awesome.
So like let's compare the world, what was it, pre-MasterChef, not being, you know, harboring these anxieties and all that sort of thing, to post-MasterChef and having, if not one of the most potent weapons in your back pocket in your chefs, whatever chefs wear, being Te Reo Māori. How has that been? How has putting yourself in a kitchen armed with Te Reo Māori been for you two?
Honestly, we filmed an episode, or like this sort of like masterclass called Te Whare Awahi, which is it was like a full cooking segment for an hour in Te Reo Māori, and they had like 4 mātanga who showed up, and one of them was like Pou Temara. And I spoke to Kristen and Hohepe because they got us all to meet together, and I went there and I was like, bro, you got the wrong cooks, man, like
throwing us under the bus.
Te Reo Māori, but like I'm fresh out of school. I feel like you've got some other people in here that are just on this whole other taumata. She's like, no, you can do it. And honestly, I've never done anything as hard and difficult in my life as like filming that cooking segment in Te Reo Māori, like in full Te Reo Māori. It was honestly the hardest thing I've ever done, ever.
Yeah, but it was mean though. It was like so hard, but it was like, we did that, and then so we did that first thing, but now everything else we've done has become so much easier, and I never ever think it was going to be easy, that first like part of like stepping out as Karena and Kasey the chefs, but speaking Māori was like quite challenging.
I was like, come on, you know how to say an active sentence, K te blah blah blah, e tunu ana. I hope that, you know, like it just all went out of my head. It was so difficult. I'm so glad we got through it. Like I wouldn't have been able to get through it without Kristen and Hohepe.
But I think in terms of how it is now, is that we've just got this whole other sort of, you know, thing behind us which helps us through what we do. So even in terms of our mahi now, it's like, so our next cookbook we're writing is all in Te Reo Māori, which is really exciting. And obviously writing a cookbook in English takes a bit of time anyway, but then having recipes that you need to do in Te Reo Māori, but then also having all of these different cooking terms and having to translate it, that's been a challenge in itself. But I think for us, it's like all of our mahi now, it's so easy what's a yes and what's a no. So when people approach us with opportunities or whatever it is, it's so black and white, which I think before we'd always discuss things, but now it's like, no
Yes,
way, we're never going to work with them,
no.
or yes or no. Or, so I think it's just given us a bit of clarity in terms of our mahi and our direction as well.
Tell us a bit more about this 100% cookbook, I roto katoa I Te Reo Māori. What has been the most difficult term? You've been throwing some degustation and all of these sorts of Italian-sounding romantic language terms at me. Hea te mea ua ki te whaka-Māori? What's been the most difficult to translate into Te Reo Māori?
I don't think there's a specific word, but there are certain words where you think like, should I have like a whakaaro Māori, you know, like use words that say like, say for an egg white, there's this there's an actual word for egg white, which is like te kahu o te heki, you know, like the outer shell. But then for speakers, it's like, should you say ko te wahi mao te heki? So it's deciding whether to use like language that everyone's going to know, or actually creating these new words that have a more whakaaro Māori style about them, or do we just use like kupu mino?
Yeah, transliteration.
So to describe the cooking thing. So it's like a real balance. So we're lucky our mum's there. So
That'll be your fellas Ngāpuhi side that wants to start throwing the kupu mino around, or the transliterations.
The problem is when she's trying to change the recipes, you know, it's not just the language she's trying to critique. It's
she's like, oh, 2 spoons of sugar, I'd put 3.
Yeah,
it's definitely your te mahurehuri side. That's that lot of it. That's that hokianga side.
Like, Mum, what's this mixed gear? We're like, it can't be mixed gear.
Talk to us about going forward. Ko tata ko eke ki te whatekau mā tahi minutes. We've reached 41 minutes, and that has gone by very fast. Me timata pia tā tātou whakakapihaere I ngā kōrero I wānga I a tātou I tēnei pō. What's next? What's on the radar? What's coming up? What do you got simmering in the background? Ooh, see what I did there? Nice.
Well, Casey's baking a bun that's in the oven at the moment.
Oh, I see what you did there.
I think at the moment, like, there's only a few weeks until Kasey gives birth to Bubba, and it's like a full whānau thing. So I think we'll just keep working on the cookbook. We're not really sure what she's going to feel like once baby comes. So
I might just want to like stay at home and just be.
I don't know. Finally, I'll just get to be out there by myself, you know, like finally have a solo career. You know, when those like Beyonce breaks away from Destiny's Child, so she'll be at home with the baby, and I'll be off doing cooking demos.
Yeah, so our book will come out next year. But I was saying, because usually when we have a book, we go on a tour, and then so if we have the book when that comes out, like I can take the baby on tour. We're actually supposed to be doing an overseas trip early next year for some like cooking stuff, so we'll see how that goes, obviously with the world and then with the baby. And so there's a few things like we can do, but
everything's up in the air. Like everything is just so unknown at the moment, with like globally with Kasey's baby. But I know we're all very like happy and excited about the future. Yeah I feel
and more important, the bun in the oven. I think that was a good call. The best, the ingredients happening. Let's go, just to wrap us up, to end our kōrero on a bit of a high. Let's go, because we're in lockdown, nā te mea kai te noho taratahi tātou I tēnei wā, Aotearoa katoa e noho taratahi ana. Everybody seems to be coming out in their droves, and everyone considers themselves a bit of a Jamie Oliver in the kitchen. What kind of words can you impart, esoteric knowledge can you disseminate to those of ourselves who are finding ourselves in the kitchen, trying all sorts of recipes that we've never, ever tried before? What can you tell us?
I think like I'm not a recipe follower. Like I definitely think of recipes as more like an inspiration. Inspirational piece. So I think like be a little bit adventurous, freestyle. I think what I'd love to see is some like really inventive and like groundbreaking presentation of the kai. So I think plating is something that I am really interested in when it comes to kai. You know, like spatial, like how much pork do you want to eat with your rice? You know, like don't just make it look cute and it's not practical. So think about the way you're actually going to be eating the food in terms of ratios to the different parts of your kai. But also it's like, if you put the sauce on there, is it going to make it soggy? Like, should you actually serve the sauce on the side in a jug or a ramekin, you know, and have the guests pour it over? Like, do you really want to put like the fresh lettuce on top of that hot, like next to the hot meat, if it's just going to wilt after a little while? You know, like I think the plating is like the next step, because I think everyone's food looks like really amazing.
And the thing is, people have already got the kai, so the plating's an easy thing to experiment with.
Yeah.
So I think just try things. And I think baking is always good because, you know, like flour and things, like those types of ingredients, depending on what you're baking.
I wouldn't know. She hasn't done any baking this entire lockdown. She hasn't done it at all.
I'm baking a whole other human. It's really taking it out of me.
Let's talk about plating then, because I think you might be on the money there. That's something that no disrespect to my Maori viewers out there, but that's something that we as Maori may lack in that department. The plating. What makes a good plate? What is a good composition when it comes to plate composition? Talk us through the composition of a good plate.
I think we could think about like negative space around the plate. Like we don't have to fill the whole thing up. Like if you think of the plate as a canvas, like some really beautiful pieces of art are like minimal, you know, so it's like you put like your food there and then there's like a lot of negative space. So maybe just think about, like leaving a bit of room on your plate that doesn't have kai on. That's what I'm personally working on during lockdown, because last time, man, I had to do like a complete cleanse just before the end because I was like, comfortable.
Hoinoe ngā tuhine, I think this is an awesome place to leave our conversation for now. It has been a pleasure catching up with you both and getting a bit of an insight into your guys' minds and even getting into your guys' home and understanding how everything works in the family dynamics. E mihi nui ana kia korua I whai wahi mai ki tēnei I tō tātou Taumata Kōrero I tēnei po. For those of us out there who want to reach you on social media, where can we find you?
On our Facebook, Karena and Kasey, and then also Instagram.
We're really great at social media.
We're on sporadically. We definitely look at everything. I think it's just...
Karena and Kasey on Insta, and then Karena and Kasey on Facebook.
And then also you can get us at Taumata Kōrero. You can get us Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio. Bit of a weird flex, but let's go there. iHeartRadio and some other podcast platforms that I've never ever heard of before in my life. But we are there, ladies and gentlemen. We are also streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. That is us for another night. Done and dusted e hoa mai. E mihi nui ana kia koutou I whai wahi mai ra ki tō tātou whakapāhotanga I tēnei po. Kia hoki anō ra ki ra kupu rongo nui ra wātu. Long live the wānanga. I am Rangatira Harrison. It has been my pleasure. We'll see you fellas. Apopo. Po mari.